Good morning from India. Good afternoon for our friends in Southeast Asia. Good evening to our friends in Australia and New Zealand. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to this third day of the Global Virtual Conference on Reimagining and Transforming the Future of Law Schools and Legal Education. It is also my proud privilege to welcome all of you to the 25th thematic session of this conference on the theme, The Webinar Revolution in Legal Education and Legal Profession. We have with us a very distinguished set of individuals, institution builders, who have themselves provided leadership in advancing the cause of what we are discussing today. I have great pleasure in particularly welcoming Professor Judith McNamara, Head of the School of Law, Queensland University of Technology in Australia, Ms. PAYEL CHATTERJEE, Senior Member of NISHITH DESAI Associates, one of the leading Indian law firms, Professor RASHMI RAMAN, Associate Professor at Jindal Global Law School, my own colleague at OP Jindal Global University. We are shortly expecting Professor Dr. Christopher Mabizira, Principal of the School of Law, Makerere University in Uganda. I also want to particularly thank my colleague, Professor Dr. JASMEET GULATI, Associate Dean, Academic Affairs of Jindal Global Law School at OP Jindal Global University, for accepting to moderate this session. I just want to quickly say that the reason for calling this as a revolution was very conscious. Little did we know that the pandemic will create an extraordinary opportunity for us to do what we are doing today. In fact, this conference is an example of what is possible when we can connect the entire world. Over 35 plus countries and 150 plus deans of law schools around the world, including professors, vice chancellors, judges, lawyers, as well as others, have come together for the last 2 days, and this is into the third day, and we are all discussing and debating issues surrounding the future of legal education. This has been possible due to the webinar revolution. It also means that we are also contributing to the democratization of knowledge and creating a more inclusive experience for people who simply could not have participated in these conversations hitherto. So this session is in many ways one of the more critical sessions of the conference, when we are going to discuss and debate about the future of webinars as a framework for interaction as we have today. I'm going to hand this panel to Professor JASMEET GULATI, and I'll see you in 55 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Raj. Thank you very much. I welcome one and all to the thematic session, the Webinar Revolution in Legal Education and Legal Profession. Joyce Meyer, an American author, once said, "Teachers can change lives with just the right mix of chalk and challenges." We've had chalks, but this year we are having our share of challenges. This will have its impact on the lives of not only the taught, but also the teachers. The impact of the pandemic has prompted educators like us all over the world to think of innovative ways to continue teaching and learning. What started as a modest ambition to sustain education has in fact revolutionized the higher education sector. Well, thanks to the imaginations of the educators all over the world. While video conferencing applications such as MS Teams, Zoom, Cisco WebEx, they have become the lifeline for the higher education institutions by making remote learning possible. They have also triggered a learning revolution outside the classrooms through webinars or online seminars. The ongoing webinar revolution has provided dynamism to academic and educational activities. Webinars help academics around the world to transcend the physical borders and speak to their global audience. Webinars made many voices to be heard globally, helping people get representation for their voices and receive recognition to their ideas. Webinars to a large extent made communication non-hierarchical. The publicly available webinars have bridged the information gap by allowing students from the remotest and the most marginalized spaces to become part of the knowledge network. Webinars in that sense have been an empowering process by bringing knowledge to everyone. The digital spaces are the new agoras for people around the world to gather and share ideas. Legal education in particular has tremendously gained from the webinar revolution. Online colloquiums have seen gathering of members from different parts of the world. In fact, it also included law firms, in-house legal counsels, members of the judiciary and law school leadership like you all present here today, and the faculty to come together to discuss the response of law schools and the legal profession to the ongoing pandemic. It has given a quick and easy connect between the legal industry and the students, easing out the various apprehensions created for students in times of uncertainty. While webinars have revolutionized the world, they are not free of concerns and challenges. The webinars have led to an information overload, fatiguing the portals and IT systems. Although concerns continue to prevail, ways are also being employed to address them. This new revolution has indeed set the groundwork for further use of deep tech and advanced digital technology in bringing about innovative solutions to long-standing socioeconomic problems. It has given an opportunity to make room for a virtual collaboration amongst law academicians, students, legal industry professionals, and enhance the experience of legal education in these difficult times. Therefore, this thematic session is an important platform to discuss the webinar revolution in legal education. I have a few questions for my panelists here today. I would invite for that, I would want to invite Professor Judith, since we know that the start of the pandemic, webinars have been utilized for a diverse set of industry and academic initiatives. So according to you, Professor Judith, in what ways have the webinars contributed generally and particularly to legal education?
Thank you. I guess maybe just to put a little bit of context behind some of my comments. Here at QUT, we've been teaching law to students who have been learning remotely for 30 years. We are a small state in Australia, in Queensland, and we're fairly diversified. So we have people living in regions that aren't very heavily populated. And for that reason, QUT Law School was established partly to meet the needs of people who lived in more remote places in the state, so that they could have a pathway to being admitted as lawyers. So we've been teaching remotely for a very long time, but that goes back to the days where we did that largely through what we called study guides, so large books that we produced or booklets that we produced to supplement textbooks and other materials, as well as audio recordings of our lectures. So we already had those remote learners. Now our practices had evolved enormously over that 30-year period, and we were a lot more sophisticated than audio tapes, cassette tapes, and paper-based study guides with a pretty well used learning management system. But that meant we were pretty well placed to transition online fairly quickly. In Australia, we moved to a lockdown in the very early stages of the pandemic, which meant we had to sort of pivot from our usual approach within a week. So we went from teaching face-to-face and remotely to teaching fully online in a week. So I think that means that it's really clear to see how the use of online seminars for our teaching has really enhanced the experience of those students, particularly those who were already learning remotely. And the feedback that we've had from those students is that actually it's a lot better for them. They feel part of the community of students at QUT. They feel much more connected to us. They felt supported through the pandemic with our ability to provide them with information, and the opportunity for them to engage with each other in online seminars and to engage with the internal students has improved their experience enormously. We have tried to have webinars for classes previously, but it's been difficult to create enough engagement just by not being able to get the number of students in the room at the same time. But because we've mixed those cohorts now, we've been able to provide a lot more engaging experiences. So that's been one huge advantage. I think some of the other things will be unpacked a little bit more in some of the rest of the questions, but our ability to do things like this when we are so far away from a lot of the rest of the world, it takes a long time normally for us to be able to go and participate in a global conference like this. So and to be able to bring those opportunities to students as well has been incredibly valuable. It's not without its challenges, and I know we'll get into those more as we work through the seminar, but I might leave it at that for the moment to give other people an opportunity to talk as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Payel, what do you think, in your views, has the online space been oversaturated with that information overload? It leads to the right content not reaching the intended audience. Some have even referred to it as webinar pandemic, rather than the pandemic that we already going through. So how relevant is this observation in the context of legal education? Even in the world of law, where information is a vital currency, how much information can be too much information? How can we effectively engage in webinars and collaborate to create a balance between knowledge creation and curation?
Thank you, Dr. Gulati. I think I agree with that statement, actually. Having been part of several webinars myself, and my inboxes being spammed to some extent, I would say, where you get an invite for a webinar on a daily basis, you actually start rationalizing which ones you want to attend or which ones you want to be part of and speak at, because it is an information overload, undoubtedly. But I think when it comes, there's a good side as well as a bad side. So there are pros and cons. Now, from a legal education perspective, I mean, speaking from my experience, the firm I work with, we started off with the concept of a continuing client education program, which was a very similar model which we already have in US in the CLE, but which we never had in India. Now, if you ask me, there are some sessions which are going to be very apt and appropriate for the law students, but not everything is meant for a law student. So I think it's very important to draw that bifurcation, that what is relevant from a student's point of view and what is meant only for maybe a client who wants to understand the commercial perspective to the law itself. So I think this is where the academicians or the faculties play a much bigger role, because if they are updated and they are keeping in pace with these kind of webinars, they know which one to guide their students, which is actually meant for them and their intake, and actually will help them understand how to move forward. But at the same time, I think students nowadays, at least from what we were back a decade back, as to we not having this kind of exposure at all. It was only maybe once in a few months when you have a faculty coming from some other jurisdiction and delivering lectures to you in your law school. Today, I feel the students are a lot more lucky, and they have this access where every day at least they can at least attend one webinar where you have a viewpoint given not just from an Indian perspective, but it's a global viewpoint which has been shared with them. So which is a great. But at the same time, yes, there has to be certain checks and balances implemented as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I think it's for the law schools to come in and play a bigger role and guide the students itself. Okay, this is meant for you and this may not be appropriate for you. So I think it's the right balance. Otherwise, it will be a fatigue and students will no longer be interested in attending the webinars. And the last point I feel is interaction. Some webinars where you are not opening it up for Q&A and the students are attending it, or they feel that the questions which have been asked by the previous speakers are something which are of, in their view, something beyond them. It should not be thought in that manner at all. It should be open discussion so that students can also participate. I think one of the best ways was me as a working professional, having got the opportunity to interact with a lot of students, and then we tailor make our presentations itself, which will be useful for the student community. So I think that tailor making of presentations and adapting to the right audience is very important so that there is no saturation.
Well, Thank you. Thank you for the very good inputs that you have given us. Yes, you're right there that it is important for us also. How do we deal with the class? Professor Rashmi, since she comes from the education and she is an academician and in law school, Rashmi, let's see, webinars and online seminars, they have for now taken up a large part of the legal education space. So do you think that the lack of intimacy and the face-to-face engagement would inhibit the exponential rise in online seminars after the pandemic? If not, what measures can be taken to increase the engagement in the online format, Rashmi?
Thanks for that question, Jasmeet, and thank you so much for having me. I think it's a really difficult and important question because it uses the word that we're all shy to talk about. What happens later if things return to normal? Are we going to have the same kind of interaction? And I like the use of the word engagement and intimacy, both of which feature in your question, because they are issues that I personally have struggled to address in the course of what has been a glut of webinars over the last 7 to 8 months. So while I have enjoyed hearing myself, and to a large extent, this is a very narcissistic process because you don't feed off of the energy of the others in the room. You are in a space by yourself. And that's, I think, partially the response to the question on intimacy. It allows people to focus much more on the content. And so I think that we are able to achieve a depth of engagement that in the past used to be quite elusive, because in a classroom, or in a real seminar, which we are slowly forgetting, in a real conference, the ones that we've been doing in our past lives, we used to feed off of the energy of others in the room. There were good panels, there were great panels. But today, every panel has the potential to be as good or as great as the speakers in it. And there isn't really, we've removed the arbitrability of feeding off of each other's energy. At the same time, I think while this is fantastic, it really takes away from the breadth of the discussion. So we've deepened it, but it's very difficult to engage everybody and have everyone participate in the conversation. And I think that's what you mean by the inequities of the system. Many people feel like they are outside of the discussion, and the othering that we so consciously avoid in legal education, in my discipline particularly, we're very conscious of the processes of othering that technology can create. And I think that inadvertently, we are tiptoeing around this landmine. And, I have a few other things to say about this, but I think preliminarily, this would be my response. And I'd love to, move forward and have a more significant engagement with my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Rashmi. So this comes, this takes me back to Payel, since she said that academicians at the law school, they can play a very important role here. So do you think, Payel, that the webinars and online seminars have brought the digital divide to the fore, as Rashmi also pointed out? How can a law school ensure that a certain section of students or teachers is not adversely affected by the lack of access to internet or, for that matter, technology?
Just me. Definitely, I think today we live in an era where it's not that it's an option to have technology, it's a must. I mean, that's something which I think the COVID-19 has made it very clear for everyone, no matter which profession you are in. Having said that, I think today's day and age, we are in a situation where all faculties as well as the students would be equipped to use the technology, but at the same time, there could be certain sessions which could be conducted within the legal, I would say the law schools itself, to making students more adept with the usage of technology itself and with the various platforms that are available these days. I mean, going from an example, like as a practicing lawyer, we have to appear before various high courts. Now, every high court has its own mechanism in place and a different platform. So we are also adapting with the same way, and I think it's the same applicable for the law students as well. And it goes back to even our judges as well as arbitrators who do not want to restrict themselves just because the courts are shut. You have to understand the usage of a technology like a video, which is there for Supreme Court, or the WebEx platform, Zoom, every platform available, and understand how to use it well and the various features. Because without understanding that, I don't think the law students are going to make the most of that. So obviously, it's a step towards the bring a digital revolution as well. And I think it's the best time for every generation to adapt to it, to make the most of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Payal. Professor Judith, webinars, see, they have provided opportunities for law school leadership like you to come together on a single platform to collectively innovate ways that we presently doing as well during the ongoing pandemic. How instrumental have webinars been in bringing about a positive collaboration between law schools to create discussions of actual impact to define the future of legal education in times of ongoing pandemic?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a terrific question. I mentioned before the opportunities that online seminars create for us to engage with people who are, very long distances away. So, ordinarily for me to visit pretty much anywhere else in the world, I need to set aside, at least a week, but probably a little bit more if I'm going to the Northern Hemisphere. So you tend to save up those sorts of connections for, sort of longer and bigger trips. But this year I've participating obviously in this panel, but early on in the pandemic met up with academics from law schools in the UK to talk about what they were doing in terms of their online learning, with a particular focus on their legal clinics and those sorts of opportunities. And we shared ideas about what was working and ways of approaching things, sort of unpacked what the issues were around things like confidentiality. And we've been able to keep that connection with those people going throughout the pandemic, so that we're supporting each other in that shared sort of experiences that we're having. On a research front, I do some research into legal education and took this opportunity to talk to students about their engagement in online learning, and was able to very quickly connect with some partners in the US and in the UK to sort of plan to work with them so that we can talk to their students as well, and again compare the experiences of students in other law schools in other countries. So those sorts of things have been able to happen very quickly. It's not, worrying about getting on a plane and setting aside time to travel. You can just schedule a time in your diary to meet up with people and have really quite in-depth discussions. And I think we're also used to being in meetings and being in classrooms and engaging in this way that people feel relatively comfortable. Whereas 12 months ago, I might have said, oh, Zoom, I'm not quite sure how to log on. It's easy. You just log in, you're there, you're talking to people all around the globe. So those sorts of opportunities are incredible. And it's also given us an opportunity to talk to our own students in different ways. So we've, as I mentioned, I'm doing a project talking to students about their experiences with online learning. And because we need to comply with our rules around social distancing, etc., we decided to do that online. So we used Zoom and Miro, which is an online whiteboard, to meet with students, to have more or less a focus group with students being able to collaborate in that way. And again, that's given me a much deeper insight into the experiences of a range of students across the law school that we can then build into our future teaching, whether that's continuing to be doing a lot more teaching remotely next year, or as we start to return to something of normality. But the opportunities to really improve the way that we collaborate and the way that we teach have been enormous.
Yeah, thank you. This actually takes me back to the classrooms, you see. So these webinars, they have truly shrunken the world to computer and cell phone screens, rendering the world to come to fingertips. So everybody, we are looking into our computers, our cell phones, and we're attending classes, we are taking the classes online. So, but the online world also has the potential to provide multiple experiences to all, to the taught and the teachers. Rashmi, according to you, do you think these online engagements such as webinars, are they distracting and define the very philosophy of classrooms or lecture halls? Since we coming back to the classrooms and lecture halls, you know, what are their experiences? Don't you think that this is somewhere define the philosophy of old traditional classroom teaching?
So it's quite tempting to go down that rabbit hole, Jasmeet, of wondering whether there was an original purpose of the classroom and there's some sanctity about the lecture hall. But to be honest, I don't buy into it. I think that the pandemic has been a fantastic equalizer, and the opportunities that exist today of bringing anybody we want, I mean, of course, subject to their availability and agreement. It's just, it's as Judith was saying, you can be in 5 countries in one day, and the power of that is enormous from the perspective of the learner. Would they rather have the same professor every day just because she's available? Or would, I would love to be a student right now because the kind of experiences students get today, it simply doesn't compare to what the traditional classroom model had to offer. I mean, just last week, actually earlier this week, we had a really senior practitioner from my former employer, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, who made a special guest lecture in my human rights class. And this person's schedule is so busy that I could never have contemplated having him come all the way to India in the middle of the semester on a day that's convenient to my class to deliver a lecture, right? So it would have to be part of a much bigger trip to India or something like that. This is what Judith was talking about. So we have to appreciate that technology in this respect has been a huge blessing. It's an equalizer also in another sense, because the exclusivity, and I speak from a limited perspective of my discipline. In international law, there tends to be little groups and exclusive little clubs of some academics in some parts of the world. But over the last 8 months, we've witnessed everybody taking to the blog space, because, and it's purely a contest of merit. So the blogs that are doing remarkably well are blogs like, for example, Afronomics, and they are hosting these virtual conferences that are just fantastic and bringing speakers from the developing world. And never before has the possibility of the global South taking a lead in legal scholarship been more real than it is today. And I think that's a big victory of the digital platform that I must acknowledge. So whatever the pitfalls, and I'm sure we will discuss those eventually, the sanctity of the real classroom and so forth, I embrace this change and I'm all for it.
Thank you for this, Rashmi. I do understand that. Professor Judith, the pandemic has opened up new avenues for communicating, teaching, and learning. This is particularly true in case of law schools, as you also say. So while hardly there are doubts about their effectiveness, the likelihood of the euphoria around webinars dying down is high once the world returns to its old normal, as we put it. So how do you envision the future of the present excitement around webinars, since I see Rashmi really very excited about the new normal and the webinar revolution. So how do you envision the future of the present excitement around webinars?
Look, I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic that we have all embraced such different ways of engaging with people around the world, with engaging with students, that's something that we will start to take as normal and natural and not something that's unusual. So, I mean, my vision for the future is that we are able to connect our students with each other a lot more flexibly. One of the I think the most significant advantage that students saw in the current approach and the use of webinars for teaching is that they had the extra flexibility to study from home, to save themselves travel time, to not have that need to go on campus, and particularly if they had other issues like health issues or whether it be their physical or their mental well-being that they needed to look after, they were able to engage in their learning in ways that suited them. And that flexibility is something that students are very, very strongly asking to continue. We have undergone such a process of upskilling our academic staff. So again, it's not, the benefits of webinars for teaching aren't necessarily uniform. The student experience is that sometimes it's worked incredibly well and sometimes it's not been so interesting. So where the people who are teaching have been able to use the technology well, where they've been able to engage with students. So one of the examples that students give is, well, sometimes in a face-to-face classroom, it's actually quite hard to put your hand up and ask a question or to participate in the discussion. And there are sometimes, classroom dynamics mean that a smaller group of students might dominate, and it's hard for them to feel that they have an opportunity, if they're still developing their confidence, to participate. But where those classes, online classes, are run skillfully, then students are given opportunities to participate that they might not otherwise have. They can use the chat function. They don't need to interrupt a conversation. They can put their questions in chat and the facilitator can come back to them later. They can use breakout rooms in Zoom to still replicate small group learning. And where that's done well, the student feedback is enormously positive, and that's something that they want to continue. But I think the key piece of feedback from students about what they're missing is that connection, the human connection and the human experience that they have on campus that they haven't been able to have online. And so that's particularly the case for students who have commenced this year and haven't really had an opportunity to form those connections. So the ability to form connections in the purely online space has been pretty challenging for a lot of people. But for those people who have already been studying for a year or two, they already have those connections and they've been able to maintain it a lot more readily. So I think one of the real challenges for the future, and something that we will need to turn our minds to if we are going to take advantage of the affordances of online teaching, is that we think about how we continue to create those communities where people don't already have the connections. And I was just reflecting on the comments earlier about sort of moving beyond existing, groups of researchers and the community connecting more broadly. And I'm wondering if there are some lessons we can learn from the way we've connected around research with other academics and with other professionals, and actually bring those into the student environment to help them to create connections where perhaps they haven't had a face-to-face experience to build upon. But there are certainly opportunities to reach out to students in different ways. So not trying to replicate the sorts of experiences that you have face-to-face, but give them different opportunities, like being able to participate in workshops, using different sorts of tools and engage in different ways, different sorts of professional networking and different sorts of student activities that aren't trying to just redo what we did face-to-face and plonk it online, but actually think from scratch about, okay, well, how do we use the tools that we have to create really good, valuable experiences, whether that's for learning, whether it's for connecting with other law schools, rather than just trying to assume that you can do things the same way when you're moving online. So, I mean, those are some of my thoughts about the future. I think it's incredibly exciting, but we can't just assume we can keep doing things the way we already have and just move it online and it will work, because we need to do things quite differently for ourselves and for students to make that successful. And how we create communities in the online environment, I think, is the really critical piece that we need to think
Thank you, Judith. Thank you so much. Having a global perspective on conflict resolution is a very important aspect of legal education. So Payel, how instrumental have webinars been in bringing such diverse perspectives from distinguished speakers across the globe for the law school students specifically, something which may not have been as easily accessible or even imaginable in a pre-pandemic era, as you have also rightly pointed out when you were talking about your times a decade ago. So have webinars indeed elevated the legal education experience?
My first response is yes, it has definitely done that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best ways or examples of that is the webinars these days are not restricted to you giving a very domestic or a local view. Most webinars are structured in a manner where you first, I think prerequisite is it's a diverse panel. You have the panelists from different backgrounds and different kind of experiences. So that what they bring onto the table is something very different. When I am being taught by a faculty in a law school, as Rashmi pointed out, it's just one faculty who is available and is teaching you. But when you are attending maybe a short 1 hour or a 1.5 hour webinar, and you have 5 panelists from 5 different jurisdictions, and who are sharing not just from a very legal point of view, but their practical experiences or what they have actually done in certain live matters, and bringing that into picture, I think it's very useful for a law student. Let me get an example, like as you said, conflict resolution itself. How a dispute is fought in India or resolved in India is very different from how it would be done when it comes to US or UK. So if you have two of a professional who are talking about maybe something like arbitration or an insolvency regime for that matter, in India, as we know, arbitration obviously has developed over the years, but insolvency is something which is at a very nascent stage. But when you have a panel which is talking about a cross-border implication or a cross-border view, which tells you how UK courts or Australian courts have dealt with it and how Indian courts, a law student goes back and suppose, I mean, if he or she is a final year student, is thinking of a dissertation or a thesis at that point in time, the pointers which you would have taken back from that webinar would be very useful for you writing and doing further research for your own paper to understand not just one point of view, but how it operates. And I think it's a great platform for students to learn and get that kind of exposure, which normally you would not be. And I think it also helps you for your further education. It gives you a broader oversight, I would say, exposure and capacity to think that maybe I am interested in this and let's know a little bit more about that jurisdiction, which can also be useful to imbibe in your own jurisdiction and studies back in India.
Yeah, but
I think it's a great thing to have that cross-border mix.
Yeah. So with this, the plethora of webinars happening online, do you believe somewhere down the line, the quality of the webinars is somewhat being compromised?
Yes, it is. I think it's very important that before we have a webinar, it is very important to understand whether it's a very broad overview or is it something very specific which you're addressing in the webinar itself, and who is your target audience? Because accordingly, you need to make your presentation so that they understand it. It is apt for them. If now suddenly I am addressing a set of students who are in their second year or third year, who have not yet studied the detailed subject or had those courses in their curriculum, and I start off with saying, okay, Supreme Court is doing this, Supreme Court is doing that, it's not going to work for them. They first need to understand what the basics are Then you can go on to explaining them with examples or and I think furthermore about other jurisdictions. But I think understanding your audience is very important, and then catering to them and depending on their requirements will be useful. Otherwise, it's after a point, you feel after half an hour of the webinar, I really didn't understand anything. It was not useful to me. Why did I waste my half an hour? You don't want the students to go back with that feeling. You rather have a short webinar to the point so that it caters to them. I think having a preparation behind that webinar is very important before you address anything.
Okay, Payel, this takes me to another question regarding the legal education that we are imparting. Basically, the practical aspect of this. With discussions and debates, are the webinars equipped enough to guide the most significant concern, which is the practical skill of a legal professional? And this question has come from the viewers to me.
Whether the webinars are equipped, I think it again goes back to who is addressing it. Now, if I am on a panel, I am not an academician, so I might not be able to address a pure academic question. But if I'm asked as to how it actually plays out in the courtroom or how an arbitrator is going to look at that issue, I might be able to give a proper example saying this is how I have seen or I have dealt with the matter in the court and how the judges have reacted to it. So I think it's the mix of the academicians and working professionals who bring in that practical element that needs to be brought in. Only then can you address that bit. Otherwise, it might not be possible to actually show the practical aspects. Having said that, I think going forward, whether you can actually deal with these practical issues or not, though we are trying to do away with the physical boundaries through the webinar, but the point is, I think maybe the right way is a hybrid solution. There are some things which have to be done physically itself. You cannot just do away with it. I might share my experience, but a law student will understand or get a lot more when he or she practically attends a court hearing. What he or she will take back with them is going to be very different from my experience sharing. So I won't say that it actually replaces it or it will be able to do complete justice. But yes, considering the times we are in, we need to have a hybrid model and make the most of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Pai, for this. Okay, Rashmi, since we know that many students are attending these webinars also to build up their CV, we know this is what is happening. So how do we tackle the practice of students choosing webinars only for the sake of, boosting their CVs? So does that impact the objective of the webinars?
Yes, of course it does, Jasmeet. And I was thinking when my fellow panelists were discussing how much I miss the things in a conference that you cannot replicate online. For me, a conference was, yes, of course, it was about the content and it was about the paper, but it was also a networking opportunity. It was the coffee between the sessions. And that's why you arrived a few minutes late to the next session. It's not because you're tardy. It's because you're meeting friends. In the end, we are social beings. And isolating ourselves, some of us, we come to this pandemic in the middle of our careers. So we have all of those experiences. And we're using this time to recollect, to share with the students. But imagine how alienating it must be for a student that doesn't have those experiences. She's in the classroom for the first time and she's listening to people recounting their days of glory, networking with somebody and how that led to a job offer, etc. That's what makes a CV, right? Not listening to somebody talk about their careers. So I think that there's a human cost to a webinar. But I think we all go into a webinar quite conscious of this cost. I don't think it's taken any of us by surprise that, oh, we can't really have networking event over coffee. And part of what's lost is also, the little discrete meetings that used to break out in conferences. And one of the things about a webinar that, everything's recorded. And so if you miss something, you can go back and listen to it. In a real conference, you never could. And so the one that took the most away was the one that was always there. So there's something to be said about all of those things of being diligent, of being on time, of being prepared, which are kind of dispensable now. They're optional now, because you can go back and look at it later. You can be in your pajamas and join a webinar where the speaker may have prepared for a long time, but you're just a casual attender. So I think that, I'm not qualified to comment, but I guess psychologically there may be something to how mentally prepared you are to take away from a certain conversation the best that you possibly can. Or are you just superficially skimming it? And I think that's a sense of, self-awareness. But having said that, I think that these are extraordinary times. And we didn't really concoct this as an alternative to real life. This is how we adapted to real life, to the challenges that life threw at us. And so, of course, there's a cost to it, but moving forward, I think that students, when they attend seminars or conferences, for the sake of their CV, it's a bit, I don't really understand it. If it leads to something like, an internship maybe, that's something that's good for your CV. But attending a seminar in and of itself is something you do because you want to know more, or you have a curiosity about the speaker or the subject, and you want to explore that further. Law students by nature are competitive, and law schools, were never meant to be easy. If someone thinks that law school was meant to be an easy ride, well, they were misinformed. Law is a competitive profession, and we all got ahead of the group by the little bit that set us apart from our peers. So I think that if there is to be a hybrid model moving forward, it has to take into account the need for real human interaction, and also the depth that having a focused discussion can afford. So I think that, it's a great convenience because it shrinks the globe. But for a student and for a young academic or professional, whoever is attending, I think there has to be something more to the webinar experience than simply a line on one CV. And I don't understand how it could be otherwise. I don't see why anybody would want to attend any event just for a line on their CV.
So what would be the significance of webinars in the post-COVID education system?
Well, I think that they will continue to be spaces where we can bring together a wide diversity of professionals, practitioners, academics, without the restrictive costs associated with preparing and planning those things in real time. But I also think that we have developed a sense of comfort with this medium, and that's going to make us stronger moving forward. This is no longer going to be so exceptional. We're all used to sitting in front of a camera. We understand the good things that it can do for us. And I believe that moving forward, we're all going to think of ways of how we can return to this sense of comfort, but also try and do things that are local in a sense. So the global and the local are going to coexist in our lives, as they have already done for many of us. And I think moving forward, the future of the webinar is that I don't think it will ever replace a conference, but I think that it will enrich existing conference sessions by having people not treat the guy who's participating from Skype as an outlier, but as very much somebody in the room. Because in the past, we were used to, so many people used to gather in a room and there used to be one person on Skype. And then most of the time there would be AV problems and a lot of, oh, hello, can you hear me? and oh, I can't hear you, I can't see you. But now this is the rule. This is not the exception. So this learning, I believe, I hope very much that what we've learned is going to be helpful to us to be more functional professionals in our chosen fields.
That's right. So with no certainty around the end of this ongoing pandemic, webinars could continue to play an important role in creating discussions of importance. So Judith, how should the virtual space evolve for a better webinar experience for law school students?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that we can do in terms of our experience. I think we need to think about what we can do differently, and advantages we can get from the webinar that we might not be able to get from our face-to-face experience. So, and I think we need to learn a lot more about the technology that's available and how we can effectively use it. So we can have a seminar, and one of the great advantages is you can go to things that you might not know a great deal about and maybe just listen and learn about things that you otherwise might not. And that, I don't think we should see that as a negative, that people might go to things that they otherwise wouldn't. But in terms of when you're wanting a deeper experience, I think as facilitators, we can always think about how we engage with the audience. I think one of my fellow panelists talked earlier about knowing your audience. And so ways of bringing the audience into the discussion, ways of connecting with them. I think we can think about how to do that. One of the advantages is that the webinar is recorded, so people can come back to it. They might want to revisit certain parts, think more deeply about aspects of the discussion. But we can also think about how we capture the webinar in a different way so that someone doesn't have to listen to the whole seminar, but can still get a sense of the experience and who they might connect with. So one of the things that some of my colleagues here have done from a classroom webinar recently, where we had legal professionals from a range of different sorts of backgrounds talking to students about entrepreneurship and innovation. At the end of the panel, I mean, it was recorded, students can listen to it again, but we also created, I don't know if you're familiar with the term sketch notes. So we had a visual artist draw the conversation. So there is an artifact there that you can quickly visualize in one page that captures the panel discussion. So you sort of, you've got a way into the discussion before you know whether there are parts you want to go and listen to. And I think there are all sorts of creative things we can do about, let's move beyond a video camera and a microphone and think about other supporting tools that we can really use to enhance the online experience. And then, there will always be those opportunities to connect face-to-face, but when we're connecting virtually, how do we get real value out of that? How do we get more out of the virtual experience, or different things out of the virtual experience than we do out of the face-to-face? And they are different things, we get different things out of them. So I guess I really challenge us to think about this as an opportunity to get something different, but we have to think about creative ways of doing that.
Thank you very much for this point. Well, this takes me to the last question for you, Judith. So do you believe that an entire virtual institution can be established in future? Because we've been very positive about the webinars.
Yeah, look, I'd have to say yes to that. I wouldn't like to say no. I don't know how long that will take, but I certainly foresee that at some point in the future, and probably not too far away, that's possible. And the advantages would be enormous. I mean, one of the advantages in terms of law school collaboration that I didn't mention before is being able to connect our courses to courses offered by law schools somewhere else. So something that we don't teach, and allowing opportunities for our students to do that. So, maybe in an ideal world, it won't be a single virtual institution. Maybe it will be a web of virtual institutions, and it'll be a much more holistic view rather than sort of one virtual institution sort of covering the field. I'd like to see us create a network and a web of virtual institutions that connect together.
Thank you. That's a very positive note, Judith. So, well, John Dewey, an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer once said, if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. So one needs to change with changing times and innovate new ways of teaching learning process. Thank you very much. It has been a very enriching discussion. And like me, I'm sure that our audience would have been enlightened with the talk. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, for so ably moderating this panel. It was a fascinating discussion, and I really believe that some of the ideas that were generated during the course of this discussion will inform our thinking as we look at the future when it comes to understanding this webinar revolution. Our university has, in the last, say, over 6 months, conducted over 1,000 webinars. And I have personally been part of over 250 or so. And one of the things I realize is that the time that gets devoted for an individual speaker is significantly lesser than what it would take when it comes to doing something like this physically. That also essentially means that the people who are contributing to these efforts, their time is valued, and indeed more number of people are able to join and participate. And of course, geography clearly becomes history when you bring this into the technological context. Of course, I, for one, do not believe that the brick and mortar campuses are a relic of the past, and I do believe that they will remain and will continue to play a very significant role. But it does create an extraordinary opportunity that we hadn't explored as much. Of course, PAYEL belongs to a law firm which has been at the forefront of some of these innovations for a very long time. And we in academia, at least I will speak about our university, have been a little late in understanding the possibilities that technology can provide. So I'm grateful to Ms. PAYEL CHATTERJEE, Professor JUDITH McNamara, Professor RASHMI RAMAN, and of course, Professor JASMEET Gulati for being in this conversation. I'm sorry that we couldn't have Professor Christopher Mabazira. This also, of course, shows some of the limits of technology that all of us face when it comes to getting access as well. So thank you once again.